If you listen when your mind speaks, then I think we'll start to recognize when we're actually talking. And when I say that, I mean that sometimes our mind is filled with thoughts that we don't necessarily recognize. Things that may be negative, things that, may run rampant in a sense. But I think the only way to quiet the mind is to listen to it. Not necessarily treat it as this negative thing that we're constantly trying to escape from. Because I feel like to enforce separation in this way is to enforce the idea that who we are is dependent on its absence, or who we are is dependent on it being a certain way so we can be a certain way. When I don't think anything's like that. I think in a lot of ways we have to learn to listen to what our mind has to say. I think our mind is sort of a detailed tapestry and story as to what we've experienced, what we've gone through, and what we've internalized as people. And I think if we want to overcome, the things that we've internalized, our traumas or anything, it's about listening to the way our mind works and recognizing when it's talking rather than us. And when I say it rather than us, I'm not necessarily enforcing this big idea that the mind is separate from who we are, but to say that it subtly is. You have to listen to your mind at times. You think with your mind, you think with this is and the other. But who you are is more easily expressed than it is thought. You don't have to think to be yourself. You don't have to think to do the things you want to do. You have to do them. And sometimes our mind is just sort of a tool, a thing that's sort of posited to help us use the information that we've gathered in our past to build a better present, not to worry about the future, not to worry about the past. I think when we constantly allow our mind to run rampant and we don't actually listen to what it's saying and its implications or what it means, then we're sort of stuck with, just the face value of what it's saying. And I think sometimes a lot of people give into what their mind says instantaneously, as if what their mind has to say is a true prescription of what actually is going on right here when it's really not. I think a lot of what is going on here is what's going on within us in a lot of ways. And that's why I think to listen to yourself is to sort of listen to the world in a sense, or to listen to your mind. Because the mind, I think, is telling you how things have gone. It's telling you how things have been and how you've been conditioned by what you've experienced and how you perceive what you experience. And I think if we want any say in what our mind turns into, if we want any say in what our mind has yet to do and what we need to do for ourselves in order to transform our mind into something helpful, then we need to listen to its plea sometimes. We sort of need to listen to the pain it's feeling and love ourselves enough to feel that pain and love ourselves enough to change. You know, I think sometimes our mind just tells us, you know, that we need attention in certain places. I think when our mind tends towards insecurity, it's validation that it craves. When our mind tends towards a lonely idea, then what we need is connection. And if we can recognize what our mind needs, given the thoughts that we have, given the subconscious beliefs that we carry, then we can learn to give ourselves the things that we actually need. We can learn to give ourselves life. Learn to give ourselves an open ear so we can actually hear ourselves. So we can actually hear the distinction between our own thoughts and what we actually desire. Sometimes our thoughts are reminiscent of the past, and I think that's why people who constantly live in thoughts do nothing towards creation of a better present or better future. A man who thinks all the time has nothing to think of but thoughts, Alan Watts. And, that's a quote I think I got pretty early on, and I didn't really understand it, I think, until now. At least I can apply it now in a grander understanding. And what that means to me is that, you can't achieve anything without doing it. The mind and the body are I want to say two different things, but they encompass one thing, you. And if you only lead with one, then you sort of neglect the others. And I think once you learn how to, I guess, use all of them in a certain amount of harmony, then that's when life will be reminiscent or embody harmony. And I don't think that necessarily means that your body has to be in some crazy condition, or that means that your mind has to be in the greatest possible form. It just means that we need to learn how to find contentment where we are. and recognize that a lot of times this goal that we're facing is not necessarily a goal of appearance, not necessarily a goal of how we think our mind works. It's a goal of feeling. It's a goal of how we feel about whatever it is that we think, however we feel about what it is that we do, however we feel about how we look. Everything's just a relationship to how you feel about yourself. And that's what I think is carried in the thoughts of our mind, our thoughts about ourselves. You know, if you think that you're not fit for a certain situation or certain opportunity that's in front of you, it may be because your mind is convinced that you're not enough. So the implication is not to give into the mind, but to enforce or show it that it's incorrect. And I think one of the easiest ways to show it is by being present, recognizing that who you are and your establishment into the moment is not dependent on some thought. It's not dependent on anything, really. You're here regardless. And if you're going to be here, you might as well be here, you know, and listen to the mind, listen to what it needs, and give yourself what you need. If it's just telling you nonsense, you might need some clarity. And the easiest way to find clarity is by being in the present moment. And then you might be asking, how do you get into the present moment? I feel like my mind's always running. My mind's always this. My mind's always that. I think we should stop telling ourselves our minds are running, in a sense. Stop convincing ourselves that our minds are bigger than we are, that we have no control over what we think and who we are. I think those sort of relationships that we're establishing in our mind are compounding upon our struggle with it. If we want to overcome it, then we need to stop establishing to ourselves that it's something that we can't overcome and start giving to ourselves an actual opportunity to overcome it via our own listening, via our own attention, via our own intention. And when we're intent with these certain, I guess, actions and trying to get to the present moment and listening to our thoughts for what they are, I think is important. You know, allowing negative thoughts to be negative thoughts. And by acknowledging them, by actually listening to them and hearing them, we already enforce the idea that we're not that thought, that we are not that negativity that's carried in that thought. And I think it's, after that, it's sort of important to not base your feelings upon your thoughts in a way, or at least not ones that you actually want. You know, I think we have to be mindful of what we consume, be mindful of what we let into our psyche, let into our character, and the beliefs that we sort of subtly impress upon ourselves without knowing it. For this, I think meditation is sort of important. Like, I don't really account for how much meditation has helped me in my journey, but I'd like to think it's done a lot. It sort of allows you to see your mind, allows you to see the way your thoughts are sort of going, allows you to see what's not you, you know, allows you to see what you've convinced yourself of in a lot of ways, even if you don't necessarily know it. Because whenever I've meditated, I've never had some crazy experience and encounter like seeing myself or something like that. It's just me sitting there, and that's all it is. And I think when our mind no longer has a lot of stimulus to feed it, no longer tries to take in from the world and tell us what's going on and tell us how things are, then it begins to form, or it begins to tell us, you know, what's inside of us. And I think the mind sort of is constantly trying to protect us. It's trying to protect us from ourselves in a lot of sense, and protect us from bad feelings about ourselves. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. But I think the reason that we feel bad about certain things is because we've convinced ourselves that we need to feel bad about certain things, that we need to feel bad about how the world reacted to us, how we feel bad about how this person perceived us, or be worried in a sense about how we're perceived in general without even going out into the world and seeing how we're perceived. Sometimes the mind creates the problems that we live in. And if we never give a chance to listen to it, then we won't recognize it, that it's the mind creating it. We'll think that it's actually a characteristic of the world we're living in without recognizing it's characteristic of the world within. So the importance is to sort of allow it to become still by actually listening to it. By giving it a chance to be seen, we sort of allow it to stop being so performative. I think our mind is trying to grasp at our attention a lot of times because it is our attention. It's everything that encompasses sort of our perspective. And if we never feed it the right things and never give it some type of clarity, some type of understanding, some type of appreciation, some type of affection, some type of love, some type of positivity, then all it's going to be able to perpetuate is the negativity that we fed ourselves in the past. And whatever we've created in the past will be recreated in the present. Not necessarily in terms of great things, but in terms of the feelings that we had in the past. I think a lot of times we suffer before it's necessary. I think it's a Marcus Aurelius quote. He suffers more than necessary who suffers before it's necessary. I think a lot of us are doing early suffering. I think a lot of us are suffering now because of things that we suffered of in the past. It's almost like we're perpetuating our own suffering onto our experience by not acknowledging that each experience is new, by not acknowledging that the past is no longer here. The past is past, and we need to let yesterday be yesterday. And I don't mean that to say don't acknowledge the traumas and their impacts on your current day, but to say that the reason that sometimes our traumas and our past impact our current day is because we think that who we are is dependent on it. And we're carrying ourselves into the new day, and we're carrying those feelings with us because we have not given ourselves what we need and haven't listened to our minds enough to know the ways in which we've been undone and what we need for help. You know, that doesn't mean you can help yourself 100% of this time. Some people might I wouldn't say need benefit from like therapy or something like that more than introspection and deep thought. But I think it's important to acknowledge to yourself that these sort of things are possible for you. You know, we have a finite amount of time here, and I think we'll never be able to truly experience it if we're stuck in the past or stuck in our mind. You know, the mind doesn't see the world for what it is. It sees the world for what you are. So until you become something that you actually like, you're not going to see a lot of things that you like in the world, at least relative to when you do. Since I began to like my self-love journey and appreciation of myself, I find so much more to appreciate in life. And even when I am down, my mind doesn't look for more things to be negative. It continues to look for positivity. It continues to look for greater perspective. It continues to look for ways in which I can look at the world and keep myself there. And by doing that, I keep myself in a higher vibration, higher feeling, a more positive outlook. And I create more positive things. And since I'm creating those things and I'm circa those things, I'm close to those things, I experience the positivity. When you express gratitude to anything, you feel gratitude too. When you express love to something, you feel the love. So if we can learn to express to our world, express to everything around us, thank you. Express, I love you. Express just contentment. Then I think what we will experience is that contentment. Because all we experience, I think, in a real sense, is ourselves. And of course, there are certain negative things in the outside world that serve to impact us. And I think those things are very true. But I think if we can recognize we have any control in our perspective, then it should be used to make our experience more comfortable, used to make our experience more whole, and used to give ourselves a certain amount of drive and passion and love and affection for ourselves, enough to pursue our dreams, enough to fail, enough to succeed, enough to try again, enough to start over, enough to feel pain, enough to be ourselves. And it doesn't take pain to be yourself. It takes allowance and acceptance. The only pain that I think we ever feel in regards to that is the pain of the breaking of your identity, the pain of breaking the habit of being yourself, the pain of your ego realizing that it no longer has a firm grasp on who you are, or your mind's association with certain things and realizing that those aren't what you are. I think the only pain that we feel is when we hold on to certain things. I think there is no pain in letting go because it's no longer a part of you. Where are you going to feel the pain? But when we hold on to certain negative ideas as if they are ourselves, or if we hold on to some of the projections of our minds so fervently that we think it's actually us, then they will be actually us. And we will be dependent on those certain things, and we will be dependent on the world around us in order to feel happy. So if we want to feel happy by ourselves, we need to learn how to not make ourselves dependent on the world or dependent solely on the mind, I think. Allow the mind to be a tool and not a console. Recognize it as something that can help you, but not something that fully is you. You encompass all of these things, not just your conscious mind, not just your subconscious mind, but all of them. It's about the paradigm that you've accepted for yourself. And when I say paradigm, I mean like the paradigm of human consciousness is your conscious mind, your subconscious mind connected, and then your body. Like what is a result of these two thinking facilities. And once we learn to listen to our mind, we listen to our subconscious. We listen to what we believe of ourselves, what is true to ourselves. And once we listen, we can use our conscious mind to implant new subconscious thoughts, which in essence change our body, change our reality, change how we perceive the world, and change the world that we experience. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you all so much. I really did enjoy this one. I hope you guys did too. It felt new. It felt vital. So keep being y'all, keep being great. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, doing what you can, what you have, making sure you're loving yourself. And I'll be back soon.